call to order the January 28th meeting of the Multimodal Transit and Pedestrian Access Committee. Majority Council Kennedy, would you please take the roll?
Sure, Madam Chairwoman. Larilliard.
Here.
Ethier. Beston is excused. Feeney.
Here.
Lang.
Here.
Gillespie.
Here.
Ricard.
Present.
Conway.
Here.
And Pearlie. You have a quorum.
First item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of our last meeting. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion.
Mr. Ricard, second?
Yes, please.
All those in favor?
Aye. Aye. Abstain.
Approved. Yeah. So this afternoon, I want to welcome Sandy Miswit, Executive Director of the Capital Region Transportation Committee, who has come down here today to speak to us about the Capital Region Transportation Committee's Capital Region Vision Zero Safety Action Plan and how it will impact Albany County communities. Just want to point out that I was very proud to serve as a member of the Community Advisory Committee for this plan, and we're very excited to hear what you have to say about this plan, and we have several legislators here whose districts are part of the recommendations of the plan, so City of Albany as well as City of Cohoes.
Wonderful.
So thank you, Sandy.
All right, well, thank you for the invitation. Good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Sandy Miswitz. I'm the Executive Director of the Capital Region Transportation Council. So I am here to talk about the Vision Zero Safety Action Plan for the Capital Region, and again, specifically the projects and recommendations for here at Albany County. So to start with, I'll just give an overview of the plan and the program that we use to fund the plan, talk about leadership and a draft resolution that the county, I would encourage the county to consider adopting, that basically supports the plan and commits to working toward the recommendations. Talk a little bit about a crash data dashboard that's publicly available for anyone to cruise through crash data. And then we'll talk about the implementation program for hotspots, as well as what we call areas of high risk. You'll also hear me use the term systemic. It's a systems level approach to safety, which is a little different than how we think about hotspots. And as I'm talking that through, if you're confused and you want more information, feel free to stop me. So just a bit about the grant. So we were a lucky recipient of a federal Safe Streets and Roads for All grant, which provided the bulk of the funding for the project. This project was also done in partnership with the cities of Albany, Saratoga, Troy, and Waterville, as well as the village of Green Island. Everybody on that list is a funding partner as well. And NISDA also provided a great deal of support. And what is the purpose of this? It's to identify safety projects and programs eligible for the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant program, which we hope will continue. As you know, we're reaching the end of the IIJA legislation actually in 2026. So things may be subject to change, but we do believe that this plan has a long life beyond just that one specific program. I am going to go through things quickly. There is a lot in the document. I do encourage you to take a look at it. I understand you all received a link to everything. But again, feel free to stop me if you have questions. One of the things that we've been out promoting recently is sort of this leadership and resolution program, where the goal of the whole Vision Zero safety effort, as we've defined it, is we set a target to eliminate fatal crashes and reduce serious injuries by 50% in the entire capital region by the year 2050. It's an ambitious goal, but it's a goal if we commit to work together, can be achieved with the right investments. And again, as part of what we're trying to do, we're going around the communities, the counties included, and have resolution language, which I'll be happy to maybe share with you, Susan, directly. For the county to consider adopting, which basically says you agree with the concept of Vision Zero and that you are willing to support working towards implementation of the plan. I also mentioned the crash data dashboard, and there's some examples on the slides that you'll see of what this looks like if you haven't already had a chance to look at it. The link, and I provided the team here with a copy of this presentation, so I'm certain it can get circulated to everybody if you want the direct links to things. But what the link will bring you to is a Power BI powered dashboard that lives on our website, and it's a filterable, interactive platform in which we have stored 5 years of crash data, the same 5 years of crash data we used in the work to build this plan. And it allows you, any member of the public, to filter the data based on any number of parameters. You can kind of see on the screen. You can search by municipality. I know it's a little small up there. You can search on municipality. You can search on the severity of the crash. You can think about weather conditions. Boy, you know, there was a big snowstorm 2 years ago. What happened on that day? So there's definitely different ranges of filters you can select to look at crash data. And as you select crashes, there's a map that appears in little bubbles, and you probably have seen maps similar to this elsewhere that show you a density of crashes. It also provides the data in tabular form. And you can definitely search it on different factors like collision type or a crash type. And it's a great resource when, you know, particularly when you're a member of the legislature or representing a community, you get the phone call or the email from a member of public saying, hey, this road is really unsafe. And now you have a resource to go to when you're getting those phone calls to say, well, what did the data say? And this is just one aspect of safety, of course. This only is going to tell you the outcomes of incidents we know about. It doesn't account for the safety or the perception of safety when things aren't necessarily resulting in a crash. There's always a feeling of being unsafe. So just bear that in mind. But the different slides that you're seeing here just show some different representations. This one is the vulnerable user slide, which focuses on bicyclists, pedestrians, and road safety workers. And you can see that it creates sort of a density of data that's highlighting where your, quote, problem areas are. Right, and it's really just trying to draw attention to that there are sections of a county like Albany where we are experiencing a higher level of crashes, you know, for that particular category of crashes. And again, you can filter this, and as you filter through the different types of crashes, the different contexts of the county, we have urban areas in the county, we have also very rural areas of the county, and they have different crash characteristics. They have different issues happening, so the data can kind of filter that out. But I think what you folks mainly want to hear from tonight is really, you know, the results of the study and recommendations. So I'll talk first about the hotspot analysis. So this is, again, is how we traditionally focus on safety, right? A crash happens, there's a crash report that's created, you look at a history of crashes, and then you try to figure out if there's a pattern of behavior or a pattern related to that incident, and you go try to find funds to fix it, right? That's sort of the traditional approach. And because there are still a lot of hotspots, as you could expect, we looked at this in a slightly different way. We looked for the potential for safety improvement. So there are instances where an area may be experiencing a number of crashes, but the fix is a lot harder to reach. So we're trying to identify places that have a greater potential for us to have an intervention that can actually have an impact on reducing those crashes, particularly low cost, easier to implement improvements. We look at area-wide crash exposure. We also looked as part of this for vulnerable road user, high-risk areas, and looked at things like transit stops. So we definitely paid certain attention to certain crash characteristics as part of the hotspots analysis. And in our work, we've kind of identified this dot map. And every spot needs to be looked at in a little more detail through some kind of a safety investigation or other analysis to really dive in, do a deep dive into the specific countermeasure that needs to be implemented at each hotspot location. So there's a lot of work that will go on as this project and program continues. For the purposes of the work that we did in this plan, we looked at 41 street safety investigations as part of this for the whole project. Many of them resulted in the recommendations of low-cost improvements like pedestrian crosswalks, signal signs, lighting, Americans with Disabilities Act improvements, so curb ramps, those sorts of things. And those were common themes. And so when we go back to that term I used earlier, the systemic, when we're thinking about a project in the county and we're looking at what can we be proactive about, think about your pedestrian crosswalks, think about your ADA ramps, and making sure that these countermeasures are implemented at the point you're even doing maintenance. And that can help, again, reduce the risk of a crash from occurring at these locations. As with any analysis, we had some exceptions that had some higher level of recommendations. Here, focusing again on Albany County, we looked at Sand Creek Road, where there was a recommendation for a shared use path and a mid-block crossing. We looked at Broadway in the city of Albany, particularly around the Thatcher Pleasant Street area, where we had some intersection recommendations. Similarly, at Fuller and Railroad Avenue, and also on Livingston Avenue, we had some corridor-wide improvements. So there are some segments and some locations that we were able to do a little more in-depth analysis now, but we hope that feeding you folks this information and feeding the communities this information will help lead to some improvements. In addition to that, each quarter concept that we developed, we did a deeper dive in just a handful of locations. Originally, we were going to do some demonstration projects as part of this. The definition of what a demonstration project was a little confused, so we switched it over to doing what we called quarter concepts, which essentially we'll call it a roadway audit. Where we had graphic design recommendations, we conducted a lot of public outreach, there were walks through these areas, and some of the areas specifically we focused on in Albany County was the area around Albany High School, so the North Main, Western Ontario, Washington Avenue area, in Waterville on 2nd Avenue, 15th and 16th and Broadway, so sort of that little box, and then Lower Hudson Avenue in Green Island. So, I know this is hard to see, so I will encourage you to look at the specifics in the report. But again, for Green Island, we kind of segmented it out and looking at the southern portion from Hudson Avenue to the 787 northbound ramp at the Village Line. There was a walk audit done. There was a workshop done at the Senior Center. There was a public meeting held in conjunction with both cities, the city of Troy and Waterville, and there was also a virtual public meeting held. So there was a lot of opportunities for input into what the issues were in this area, and that resulted in some of the ideas. So some specific ideas that I know are hard to see on the screen, shifting some parking around because that can offer some safety benefits, addressing a lane shift to better accommodate parking and to traffic calm this area. Were a couple of the ideas floated. In the central portion, moving up towards Lower Hudson and sort of the odd intersection going over to Troy at Albany Avenue. So looking at wider shoulders to discourage speeding, a right turn from the bridge with an extended curb, and incorporating some NISDOT plans because there was some work being done on the bridge that NISDOT is focusing on. So incorporating these ideas into that work, into the intersection design work that's being done as part of that project, and then of course additional crosswalks. And you'll, again, that theme of crosswalks, you'll hear me say it repeatedly. Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Yeah.
So the crosswalks, like mid-block crossing at Sand Creek, is that where there's a light and people cross, but there's no street on the other side? They cross the sidewalk?
So an example can be that. It can also typically be where there's no signalization at all, and a pedestrian's looking. So one great example on Sand Creek Road, if you can envision where the Hannaford Plaza is and the office buildings on the other side of the street. There's a signal at Wolf Road, and then there's another signal at Computer Drive, but most people cross right in the middle. So that's a typical example of what we refer to as a mid-block crosswalk, or a mid-block crossing location that would be considered for a crosswalk. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah.
Yep. So on the northern section of Lower Hudson Ave, excuse me, Again, crosswalks at Lafayette. There were some concerns around the senior center about visibility and high speeding, so some ideas there. There was a proposal to continue the bike lane and connecting better to the Empire State Trail. And again, new crossings by municipal buildings. So that sort of encompasses the Green Island concept. For the Waterville area, there were a lot of ideas generated. You can tell by the image, 15th and 16th, and that box between 2nd and Broadway. Similarly, there was a lot of public input into this, similar approach to how we did it. There was also some preliminary planning work done by others related to Hudson Shores Park that was brought into this conversation. And so just a few of the ideas, and again, I know these are really hard to see because I'm having a hard time seeing them. But this is 16th Street between 2nd and Broadway. Broadway, of course, being closer to 787. So some of the ideas floated here is to provide some medians on 16th Street to provide better pedestrian crossings. So set opportunity for a safe waiting area in the middle of the street if you should get caught in the middle. Some redirecting of traffic around the ramps on 787 side. The potential for building a tunnel underneath 787. And done by others, this concept is of course part of the broader reimagined I-787 project, one that might have an opportunity to stand on its own 2 feet and become its own project to move forward, which would be very exciting. The little hashed boxes at the intersection of Broadway and 16th represent an area where they're recommending a raised intersection. So there's some of these are already installed up in Cohoes where it's just pavement slightly raised a little bit to provide a little wake up to drivers like, hey, you're entering an intersection, it could be a pedestrian there. And so a number of other pedestrian and bicycle treatments are recommended in this area. The 15th Street area of this particular study area incorporates the idea of changing some of the parking, so actually using back-in angled parking as a potential for serving as a traffic calming tool, but also providing some additional spaces because that's one of the things that was discussed a lot there. The raised crosswalk, creating one-way traffic flow onto 15th Street from Broadway. So there's a number of ways that looking at sort of traffic calming this area were some of the key recommendations for that corridor. And then the Albany corridor is, of course, again, the area around the high school, the various intersections and streets that surround the high school. Similar public outreach was done on Western Avenue. Some of the concepts identified are a wider sidewalk with a multi-use path potentially, some additional curbing. On Washington Avenue, consideration of a road diet. Could we reduce the number of travel lanes? Yeah, go ahead.
How far down Washington Ave did you go? Because the Crossgates Commons area is problematic as well.
So for the purposes of this specific corridor concept, we only went between North Main and Ontario. So we didn't look all the way up. There are other planning studies that look at the broader Washington Avenue corridor that I can share with you later on.
Okay, thank you.
So again, thinking about can we reduce the number of travel lanes, add a center turn lane instead of having 4 travel lanes, which right now, if you know that area, it's 2 in each direction. Changing how the students are dropped off and picked up, so making that interchange a little safer for folks, adding some more curbing, widening out the sidewalks a little bit, because at dismissal time, you folks know that there's a lot of students that pour onto the street, and there's not enough room for them all sometimes, right? Especially snow, right? So, we want to make sure that there's space for everybody. On North Main, there's some ideas of actually adding some medians by the high school driveway that's on North Main. And then on Partridge and Ontario, better defining parking. And again, some raised crosswalks, better defining the crosswalks, particularly at State Street and Spring Street. So there are a number of ideas that are specific, and you can read the report. There's much more in there than just those couple of examples. Some other more programmatic areas that we looked at in terms of recommendations, just this broader topic of safe routes to schools. There's no doubt that, we are concerned about students, particularly in areas where students more often walk to school than not. We want to make sure that these areas are safe. So this section of our report talked about the streets adjacent to all of these schools. Looked at the collectors and arterial roads, in particular those within about a quarter mile of the school, and identified a number of capital recommendations, again focusing on pedestrian infrastructure, school zone signage, speed management installation. The City of Albany has been a leader regionally on the speed school signs. The camera program, I think, has been very successful. I can't wait to have Bill and the company put numbers to paper to show us the effectiveness of it. I believe as a resident of the City of Albany that it has been very effective. People are slowing down and they are paying attention. And so we're hoping, and I know Schenectady was just approved to use speed cameras at their schools as well. So I can see the momentum building for more interest in this. Along with that, more crossing guard programs, emphasis, and more education, of course, for safe routes to school. We also want to think about our transit users and making sure our transit customers are able to access the buses in a safe manner. So there was a lot of effort putting into looking at areas about 500 feet from the bus stops in the CDTA system, particularly from signalized four-way intersections. We also looked at higher volume and speed limit locations, areas that are tough to cross. So you think Outer Central Avenue. Some of the areas, the Stuyvesant Plaza area has been a little controversial lately with some changes the CDTA has made. So we're looking at areas like that where it may be difficult for a rider to cross the street. And again, you're just hearing me say these words again, crosswalks, right? High visibility crosswalks, improved lighting, warning signs, parking restrictions to make sure in locations where you do have on-street parking that the visibility is there for the pedestrians and the drivers who are navigating these streets as well. We also did a risk factor analysis. So this gets into that systemic approach, so feel free to stop me if I'm using terminology that might be unfamiliar. What we did is we looked at certain types of crashes that were prevalent in our crash data, and the most common ones were intersection-related crashes, roadway departure. So roadway departure sometimes gets confused with just people running off the road to hit an object. They also include lane crossovers where you've crossed over. So think the most obvious example is on the Slingerlands bypass, right, where we've had a couple of high-profile ones of late. That is also considered a roadway departure crash. Speeding crashes and pedestrian-related crashes. So those four sort of focus types, we did a little bit of analysis to look at why these crashes are more prevalent and what are the things on the roadway system that create that risk. And so we looked at facility types with a high concentration of those crashes to see what those facilities had in common. Were there certain design features, land use patterns? What is it about these areas that were common to them that may help contribute to what we're seeing as outcomes? And so what we ended up creating, this is another series of maps that we can provide access to you guys to, where we actually rated, based on these focus types, how risky the road was for that type of crash. So in a numeric scale of 1 to 6, 6 being the highest risk, there's a color-coded map for each roadway in the county. And you can see in this example on the screen is just for speed-related crashes. But if you were to zoom out, you would see, a range of colors, but it would flag this roadway has a higher likelihood of having a speed-related crashes, and that can trigger the thought, why? And there are some commonalities to what we're seeing in some of that. And so what those commonalities led to is the development of what we're calling systemic treatment packages. So these types of crashes that are often occurring on certain types of roadways with certain characteristics, how do we, again, proactively correct for that before the crash happens? Because I think that's one of the things that we want to start changing the mindset of. We shouldn't be waiting for the crash to happen to do something. We should be trying to prevent it from happening in the first place. So that's what the systemic approach is really all about. It's getting ahead of it, but in order to get ahead of it, you have to understand some of the relationships between roadway design, human behavior, and the things that contribute to the crashes and things that can be mitigated. So in this report, we compiled a lot of the approved countermeasures into these systemic safety plans, or NISDOT did, I should say, and they have a number of statewide plans now. The Pedestrian Safety Action Plan being one. There's a vulnerable road user plan. There's a roadway departure safety action plan. They looked at this data statewide, so the most urban of urban places in New York City, and the most rural place in the middle of the Adirondacks, right? But what are those characteristics? And that's all defined in those reports.
Did you factor in motorized bikes and e-scooters at all?
Yeah, up to the degree we could. It's interesting. The crash data we used, the most recent year was 2023, and DMV has started to change the definitions on the police reports because there's different types of e-mobility devices, right? So e-bikes are legal on the street. There's also what I'm referring to now as e-motos, which are not quite full motorcycles, but they're certainly not an e-bike. It's a whole category, and they are not legal. You should be wearing a helmet, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a hierarchy that's starting to come into this e-mobility universe of how they're going to be regulated, because there's different classes of vehicles, and some of them are going well above 20 miles per hour now. So all of those state plans that had identified systemic treatments, along with Federal Highway Administration on a national level, also have some safety proven countermeasures or proven safety countermeasures, allowed us to generate these packages that are grouped by focus facility, eligibility for federal funds, countermeasure type, and compatibility with the area. And again, they're intended to help guide the development of grouped projects. And these packages can be implemented in various ways by a municipality or a county. You can do it on a spot. Hey, I know we're going to be over here working on this road. While we're there, do this, this, and this. Or you can say, hey, we're just going to tackle this range of pedestrian issues, and we're going to do a bunch of crosswalks across a range of roadways. So there's different ways that these projects can be implemented. But all of them, do require some obvious field evaluation. You can't just go and install everything. There's more work to be done, but I think these systemic packages will provide a little bit more food for thought, particularly for your highway department folks. I know Lisa Raimondo, is very active in this area to again integrate them where and when they can. A lot of these treatments are applicable to multiple spots, so that's why we encourage the bundling of projects. So even if you're coming for federal aid through our office, it may not be a type of improvement that would work on one road. But if you had 10 roads that you were putting in a bunch of these treatments on, that would be a competitive type of systemic project. And some of the categories of these systemic projects, again, they can be ranging from bicycle lanes. A lot of these higher level countermeasures do require more detailed engineering. Like, you just don't put a roundabout in a series of locations, right? So there is more engineering work that needs to be done. But there are a lot of HSIP eligible types of projects, and that's more or less what's listed on this screen. And the HSIP program, if you're not familiar with that acronym, it's the Highway Safety Improvement Program. It's a federal program that is specific to installing and improving safety. And it's a program that is very undersubscribed in the sense that it's difficult to use it because you need a plan like this one to demonstrate what the issues are, because you also have to then study after you implement the project what the outcomes were. So now that we have this side done, we can dive into using these funds to implement projects, and then we can do the after studies in a couple of years when things are on the ground. Oh, and I think that was my last slide.
Okay.
So that was a lot to throw at you, and I'm sorry it was so high level, quick. I'm sure there's other questions, but it's a very detailed, as you can imagine, it's very mathy. That's what I like to say about it. But I think when you step back and look at the big picture, what we're going to try to prepare for folks to digest it a little easier is to identify in simple ways some fact sheets on what these systemic treatments are, get them in the hands of county engineers, city engineers, what have you, to just make that part of the routine of what you're doing. We have some great examples. I mean, I live in the city of Albany. They just redid my street a few years ago, and while they were there, they fixed the curb ramps, they installed street trees, they fixed the sidewalk, they did the pavement, they did these things. And, you know, had they had this information, maybe they would have put that extra sign up, or maybe they would have put in this extra thing. That isn't millions of dollars of work. And, you know, we often get one shot over a 10-year period for many of these roads, and that's probably being optimistic. You know, a lot of times the state doesn't come back to a road for 20 or 30 years, depending on the context. So, you know, we have to take these opportunities when they occur. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening, and I will take additional questions if you have them.
Do any of the legislators have any questions?
I just had one, the slide, I think it was in Waterville. What informs the choice as between a pedestrian tunnel as opposed to a pedestrian overpass? Is it federal highway standards, or is it just seems to me that in the Northeast, a pedestrian tunnel lends itself to kind of crime or perceptions of crime or vagrancy or...
So the interesting part about a bridge versus a tunnel in that specific example is the way that road is already designed and ADA requirements. So if you were to build a bridge over 787, you would probably have to install an elevator or have a very circuitous sort of switchback ramp to go up to it. Given that they were working on reimagining 787 anyway, it seemed like a good fit for the tunnel option, because if they've got to rebuild the roadway anyway, you might as well do the tunnel while you're doing it. Maybe a unique situation, but that's more the challenge with the bridges over things than the underpasses where those opportunities arise.
Makes sense. And just one follow-up, I apologize that you may have touched on it before I got here, but I didn't hear any mention of what in my district is the #1 traffic issue, which is wildlife. Does that come into your
Yeah, so
discussion?
interestingly, in some of the rural portions of, are you up by Knox, like that area? Yeah. So you do start seeing that. Now, when you look at the data aggregated for our region, it doesn't come up as often, just because we are more urban in nature overall. But there are some areas in you know, the kind of the fringe, if you will, of the area. Once you get away from the core suburban areas, you start seeing that. I have to look at specifically what we said about it, because I'm just not remembering off the top of my head. It was not flagged as a major regional issue, but that doesn't mean it's not an issue for you. And that's where that data dashboard would be handy, because I will double check to see if wildlife was one of the parameters in there. I believe it is. So you can search on that, and you'll see the bubbles of data points.
Thank you.
So I just had a follow-up question about street lighting.
Yeah.
How impactful is street lighting? Is there like a distance between lights, or the type of lighting, like they refer to LED lighting? Is that good or bad? Like, what are your thoughts on street lighting? Is that a sort of a low cost? Could that be a low cost way for safety?
Yeah, I mean, there is a lot of research on the quality of lighting, so certainly how bright it is, how it's directed at the street matters. Some of our older poles, when they shift, you know, the old Cobra lamps, if my hand's the Cobra, you know, sometimes they end up like that, and they're actually shining on the middle of the street. They're not even doing anything for the pedestrians. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, to upgrade lighting, particularly where communities have ownership of it. So as you folks know, the city of Albany actually owns most of the lighting, so they've gotten ahead of that. But you know, DOT is spending more resources now upgrading lighting, particularly moving to LED. I think there's a huge opportunity to do more of that. It really is an effective tool, particularly at twilight in the winter, because I find, and I'm sure you guys too, and I'm getting a little older, I'm not gonna lie, But I find, between 5 and 6 o'clock this time of year, when the lights aren't quite as effective, where we have the LEDs, it's just bright enough that it does make a difference, particularly when you have people getting on and off CDTA buses. I do think it is a lower cost option in the range of things that we could do. Is it the cheapest option? Certainly not cheaper than a sign, but it certainly is leaning in that way. And if you guys are interested in more, we can get you guys some more research on that.
And then the other follow-up question I had was just elevated areas on the street itself. People like lump in speed bumps as, going to interfere with plowing, but I remember when we had some of this discussion in the meetings, there's different ways to create like a slowing of a vehicle because of the street.
Yeah, there's definitely different ways to implement, whether it's a speed hump or some other tools. Ithaca, New York has gotten really creative with this. One of the concerns was emergency vehicles, right? How does the fire truck get over these speed humps, right? So they built in a way in the design of it that it only fits the fire truck's tires because the trucks are so wide, but they pass right through when they're on an emergency call. But a typical motor vehicle, because of the way our wheelbases are, you can't do that. So there's definitely ways to design these things to accommodate and accomplish multiple goals. I know, a lot of residents don't like the repetitive nature of having them on their street, where you have, one is okay, but when you have 6, that's a lot, right? And I think more thought needs to be put into those stretches where they're needed. But there's definitely different ways to approach it.
Danielle?
What about drag racing? Because in my district, I have the Washington Ave, the portion of Washington Ave that's
Yeah,
popular with the drag racers.
The report doesn't speak specifically to that issue, but it certainly came up, and anecdotally, we were out there one night when it was happening, and I go a lot to the Polish Community Center, and you can hear it. It's when they install the roundabout at the top end of the street, that's going to be one deterrent, but there still needs to be some other deterrents along that stretch of roadway. I think we've been fortunate. I don't even know the crash history involving the street racers, but
They usually mess up their own vehicles, and then I think they have the resources to get a private tow company. I think they may have taken
and they
out
just
a
kind of
couple of the
handle
city's
it
lights.
themselves, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, and it's a shame. I do think that there's more work to be done out there because it is a risky area, that road, and perhaps even New Carner. I hear they're out there as well. So yeah, unfortunately, the report didn't speak specifically to that issue, but it definitely came up.
Are roundabouts considered a pedestrian-friendly solution?
Yeah, so they've been controversial in that space, to be honest, particularly with the ADA community, because without the ability to physically stop the car, if the motor vehicle driver is not honoring and respecting the crosswalk, it's difficult for them to gauge when to cross, right? There's no queue, there's no opportunity where everybody has stopped. So there has been a lot more research being done on their accessibility for sure. I don't personally believe that they are the right solution in deeply urban environments. That's just a personal opinion. I would not want to see roundabouts in the middle of downtown Albany. I do think they have better applications in other sections of the community, but they do need to be designed with care so that upstream, if you have a roundabout, there better be a place where there is a signal so that there is a gap in the traffic, because without that gap in traffic, that's where the problems come in. I think we need a lot more driver education too on stopping for a pedestrian in the crosswalk, right? And a lot of our plan speaks to a lot of the education work that we're hoping to help engage in this year as well.
Thank you. If there's no more questions,
Thank
thank you
you.
very much for your time.
Thank you for coming.
and doing
I
the
appreciate
plan.
it.
Is this plan going to be coming up on our next agenda, the approval of the?
No, we don't approve anything. It was more informal.
It's just
It was
this
more
is-
informational.
Yeah, and
This is just for-
I'll get you folks a copy of the draft resolution re-prepped for the county, and I'm not sure how your process works, but I'll get it to you, and then
Sure.
if you guys have questions, you want to talk about it, we can do that.
So do you have any of your contact information, any
Yeah.
business cards? that you-
Absolutely.
All right, awesome.
Sure, I can absolutely leave business cards
So,
with you guys.
do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion. Second.
Feeny, second.
I was at the whole meeting.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, you go. Good job there.
It's, I like this stuff, so.